Hi, this is David Miranda, General Counsel and past President of the New York State Bar Association. Welcome to Miranda Warnings. You have the right to remain listening. Today on Miranda Warnings, we're talking about the New York ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, with Kim Wolf Price. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Kim is the Chief Strategy and Diversity Officer at Bond, Schoeneck and King, where she also has a podcast called Legally Bond.
That's right.
She's chair of the New York State Bar Association's Women in Law section, chair of the association's Wellbeing Committee, a member of NYSBA's Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Leadership Development Committees, and former chair of the Lawyers in Transition Committee. So, Kim, we're very happy to have you here. You recently wrote an article on the New York ERA that's going to be published in Wills Connect, which is the Women in Law section publication, which will be coming out. And it should be out when this podcast is released, so look for that article. So, Kim, I'm very happy to talk to you about the New York Equal Rights Amendment. Tell us, just for starters, what the New York Equal Rights Amendment is and why it's important.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me on. It's great to get a chance to talk to you and to be on Miranda Warnings. So thanks, Dave. So the New York Equal Rights Amendment. Many people might think that New York has in its constitution a variety of protections based on gender and other topics, but that actually isn't the case. It's mostly race and religion that's covered in New York's constitution. So this ERA that we're talking about is actually an amendment to New York's constitution that will be on the ballot this November.
And so the amendment that's on will prohibit discrimination based on not just related to gender, but ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity and expression, as well as pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. So that's a much broader level of protection. I know there was some concern when this was discussed, right? So maybe we can talk a little bit about how we got here. In order to change the New York State Constitution, it's got to go through two separate legislatures in New York, and it did on two separate occasions. Then it was signed by the governor, and now it's going to be on the ballot this November.
That's right. Little civics initiative for a little civics lesson for everybody. And the two sessions, as you know, Dave, it's the session for legislature is 2 years. So this is a 4-year process just to get it to the governor and then get it on the ballot.
Right. And it'll be on the ballot in November, and voters should look for it, of course, right? Because sometimes the referendums are not in the usual place where you're voting for a president or governor, or
That's right. You have to flip the ballot. It's those are on the other side.
Right. But let's talk, I want to talk a little bit about some of the concerns that were initially raised regarding this amendment. There were some concerns regarding from religious institutions that this would somehow take the rights that are conveyed here would somehow take precedent over religious freedoms. Now, I know that was discussed and that appears to have been addressed in this amendment. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Sure, absolutely. So this amendment is going to amend New York State Constitution, Article 1, Section 11, which is equal protection of the laws and discrimination in civil rights. So what you're talking about is there was concern over some of how broad this is, that there would be some impact on Articles 3 and 11 of New York's Constitution, which is religious freedom and expression of religious tenants. So there's a lot of talk with the sponsors who really did hear those concerns. And the second paragraph of the amendment now states directly that nothing in the amendment is intended to diminish existing protections outlined in Article 3 or 11 of New York Constitution to protect those religious rights. We also, of course, on the federal level have US Supreme Court cases on point, including Hobby Lobby and 303 Creative. So those are also law. So none of that is diminished here.
So the concerns that were initially raised, I think when this was a legislative proposal, regarding this somehow taking precedence over religious freedoms have been addressed directly. So that so this is not going to have any priority over religious freedoms. The religious freedoms that are already in place will not be subsumed by this constitutional provision.
Yep, exactly. Those protections outlined are not diminished by this.
So, New York obviously has a lot of progressive laws against discrimination of the kinds, some of which are covered by this constitutional amendment. Why is it important that we have a constitutional amendment to the New York State Constitution rather than just continue with the enactment of laws that protect our citizens?
Yeah, I think that there's a few different ways to look at that. And one of them is just if it's in the Constitution, as we talked about just a couple of moments ago, a constitutional amendment takes a long time. It takes a lot of thought. It takes many groups of people acting on it. Two different legislatures, the governor of New York, and then the people of New York. So something in the Constitution is stable. It's embedded in the way we think and the way we proceed and act. While we do have a lot of protections in New York laws, from the Human Rights Act to marriage equality and a number of others, having it in the Constitution means that it's much more settled. It can't be as back and forth. It can't change over just because there's a different group in power. So this is really just a chance to say, these are the things we believe in as a state, and these are embedded in the Constitution. We could get all into how if a government enacts a law, it'll be a different level of scrutiny, but I don't know if your listeners want to hear that it would be strict scrutiny in these cases instead of intermediate level.
Well, that's important if there's going to be a challenge. It's interesting to me, and probably not anybody else, but interesting to me, and maybe you.
Probably.
So how would this be enforced, right? So we have a constitutional amendment, and let's say an individual feels that they're being discriminated against because of their gender identity or gender expression, which now is a constitutional protection. Would this provide them with an individual right, or would this be something, since it's in the Constitution, that would have to be brought, let's say, by the New York State Attorney General to enforce?
Yeah, there are no additional individual rights of action here. I think that it would have to be the AG. And or if it were a governmental decision that they were questioning, then of course they could just use the Constitution in that instance, because it is no government shall.
Right. So if it was, let's say, someone in the workplace felt that, oh, I didn't get a promotion because of my gender identity, or the fact that I was pregnant and had to take time off, that would be how would you enforce the protections that we have now?
The New York human rights law does actually outline most of those. So that's where you would start, is by using the same laws that we're using today, the New York human rights law. But having it in the Constitution is a way to sort of support that law and strengthen it.
Right. And of course, I think, as you mentioned, laws that are created by the legislature can also be changed by the legislature.
That's right.
And by having this, of course, this proves the point that the Constitution can be changed and evolve, but it's a much clearer and longer term protection.
Exactly.
So let me ask you this. It's gone through both houses. It was supported by the governor. The votes that went in the legislature, it wasn't unanimous, right? It was fairly substantial majority, but there was some opposition. Now that it's going to be on the ballot in November, where's the opposition coming from?
Yeah, I have to say, Dave, I haven't heard a tremendous amount about it yet, which often does happen with unfortunately, with constitutional amendments generally, it doesn't get a lot of traction. I think that a lot of people are concerned that it is too broad. People have their own individual beliefs, and as you mentioned, the religious protection piece, maybe individuals don't know yet that that is not an issue, right? They are not going to be told they have to do something against their religion. So some of the opposition is still coming from that conversation, though the amendment itself does protect those rights to a religious expression.
Right, yeah, so I mean, we talked about that initially. So that was a concern that was raised regarding religious expression, which is protected in our Constitution and will remain protected
That's
in
right.
our Constitution in a manner that's going to be equal to these other rights as well. So these, just because this constitutional amendment is newer, doesn't give it precedent over the longstanding rights to religious freedom that this state enjoys. And
Exactly.
so, yeah, I certainly, I don't think that can be emphasized enough, because it seems like if there was going to be opposition, it might be if that, based on those grounds, it would seem to be misguided.
Exactly. And that's right. It is taken care of. Religious expression, your freedom of religion still will be as it was the day before, if this does pass and become a constitutional amendment. And some of the other things we hear are concerns that there will have to be gender neutral bathrooms, or that locker rooms, things like that. That is not the case. This does not change any of those operating procedures. That's not it at all. It's
So,
it always goes back to bathrooms, and I'm not sure why, but the argument sort of goes back to that or locker rooms. But this amendment would not change any of that. Everyone who has two, separate gendered bathrooms, that those are still allowed and very much, I think, appreciated by a number of people. So that's completely fine.
let's talk a little bit about the issue of reproductive rights. This has become, I think, much more significant following the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs recently.
Yes.
And, what Dobbs said was that basically, the states can decide, right?
Right.
And certainly New York, for many years has decided there's the right to uh, abortion and reproductive rights for women in New York State that are longstanding, that will not be certainly diminished by Dobbs or by this. But is there anything in this legislation, or rather in this constitutional amendment, that will have an impact on women's reproductive rights in New York?
Yes, it definitely will. And what this amendment does is actually includes pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy as part of the amendment, saying that no one is to interfere with someone's ability to access that type of health care and make decisions for their own health through, so that now it'll be a constitutional protection, which again, um, after the Supreme Court decision, that's when this became sort of a priority, I think, in a state that has always supported a woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions.
Right. And of course, New York, as I said, had that longstanding
That's
right,
right.
and that right remains. And so I'm guessing that with respect to this constitutional amendment, there's not going to be any direct
Right.
change day to day, but what we would be able to now say is that, well, if we have a new legislature that wants to
That's right.
change the right to with respect to reproductive rights, they wouldn't be able to, because we'd have this constitutional amendment. So that provides us with a little greater uh, confidence.
Yeah, I think it's the confidence, the greater confidence, and then under the Governor Hochul in just a couple of years ago, after the Dobbs decision, New York did actually solidify in legislation some
Right.
of those protections and laws, but this gives just a greater protection, that it would have to be an amendment to the Constitution if someone wanted to remove those healthcare choices from women or pregnant individuals.
Right. So that one is obviously an important one, and one that I think was, I think, top of mind when this was being considered. But as you mentioned, there's a number of others. Is there going to be anything, if once this, or assuming that the voters approve this and it becomes part of the New York State Constitution, is there going to be any change in other areas? Will this actually change how New York operates and the rights that New Yorkers have?
Yes, there are additional there are other protections for New Yorkers. Disability and age have not been covered before. And I don't know about you, but me, I like that age one more and more every day, having additional protections.
Sure. How old do I have to be to get those
I,
protections?
Yeah, that's exactly. I don't know exactly, but it can't be age in any direction, I suppose, even too young. And then disability as well, having protections for individuals who are disabled. Of course, we're under a federal system, so there's Americans with Disabilities Act and all the human rights laws. But this just, I think in a number of ways, what it does is include people who have felt excluded. I'll be honest with you, it didn't occur to me until all of this that a couple of decades plus ago, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States in the state of New York, but really was only subject to intermediate scrutiny. If anything came up, that I wasn't fully included as a woman when I took the oath to be an attorney. So this gives people that the sense that they are included as well, right? And it strengthens the laws already on the books and makes it a little more difficult, or significantly more, for new legislatures or new governors to seek really big change without the people's vote. And I think that's what's important about this as well, is that the people get to decide in the end. November 5th, flip in the ballot, the people of the state of New York decide whether this amendment happens.
Right. Now, you've mentioned the type of scrutiny twice, so let's go down in the weeds a little bit, right? So let's say there's legislation that protects a particular type of a particular category,
Right.
and someone is potentially violating it. When there's a lawsuit brought to see if there was a violation, right? Presumably by, I think when you're talking about that, it would be a state actor,
Yep.
right? If
State
there was
actor.
a state actor, and it's legislation, they would have to have, what would the standard that the state would have to show that it would be okay to maybe contravene that legislation? What would the court look at?
So for strict scrutiny, there has to be a compelling governmental interest. So that's the highest level. It can't just be that the government thinks this will be better. It
Right.
has to be a very compelling government interest, narrowly tailored. It can't be broad and sweeping.
So if the constitutional amendment passes, it'll be strict scrutiny where you need a compelling government interest.
That's right.
But if it was just regular legislation, it would be medium scrutiny.
Yeah, currently it's the intermediate level. Yeah, intermediate scrutiny, not so strict.
And what kind of interest? Not compelling, but any reasonable interest?
So the intermediate scrutiny is more of a reasonable basis. It's not that it has to be narrowly tailored to a government interest or a narrowly tailored problem trying to be solved. So it isn't as strict, right? Right. Which is why the other one is called strict scrutiny.
Right. Right. So if someone were to bring a lawsuit or try to enforce their rights after it becomes a constitutional amendment, they'll certainly have a better opportunity for success.
Yes.
And the basis for not complying with the law will be held to a much higher standard if you're not going to comply with the law.
Yeah, exactly. And it isn't even just the individual, right? Like the government will know when it wants to make changes that it has to be that extra level of thoughtful, right? It has to be able to explain it in a narrowly tailored fashion, which I think is good on both sides.
Now, we've heard recently about some cases regarding in vitro fertilization and right to embryos. There was a case just recently by a state court that held that the embryos had personhood. How, if at all, would this constitutional amendment address those issues?
Because it is reproductive freedom, pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes included, that type of back and forth or one court decision, because I believe there was a law and then a court decision interpreted that law in that state. And then we got to the place where people didn't know what was happening in their in vitro fertilization or IVF treatments. I'd actually even read stories about some families moving their embryos out of state before the decision because they didn't know what was going to happen. New Yorkers wouldn't have that type of back and forth, and those types of reproductive treatments would be protected.
They would be protected, and there wouldn't be necessarily any fear of how you conducted yourself with that IVF, as it's called.
Exactly. That sphere, both obviously for the pregnant or person or the family, the couple, but also for the healthcare providers, having a sense of they know what they can, talk to their patients about in regards to their patient's health.
Yeah, when you talk about healthcare providers, how would this impact someone's ability to receive insurance coverage for these various treatments regarding pregnancy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't fully looked into that, but I don't believe there would be groundbreaking changes in that, IVF will have to be covered by all. I know not all insurance covers it. And I don't believe that this would change that, but I haven't looked into that, to be honest.
Right. So it's not like, so this amendment is probably not going to have an impact on the type of
Right.
things that would be covered by insurance. It's not going to be more that's mandated. It's not going to be less that you don't have to, you don't have to do anymore. So pretty much be status quo, at least in New York.
Yeah, at least in New York. Right.
So, well, that's really fascinating. I appreciate your sharing that with us. I want to talk to you a little bit about your role as chair of our Women in the Law section, which is very active. A relatively new section. We had a Women in the Law committee, and then I think you became a section maybe within the last 6 years or so. I think it was
About
President
7, I think.
Miller.
Yeah.
I think it was President Miller. And it's one of our fastest growing and super active sections, thanks to you and others. Tell us a little bit about some other important issues that the Women in the Law section is working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I first have to thank you because you may have been the president who appointed me to the Committee on Women in the Law a long time ago. So that's how I got to be chair now. So thank you. So the Committee on Women in the Law, obviously, we're doing a lot of education around the ERA so that people know what's happening, so the voters can make this decision whether or not to amend New York's Constitution. We also have focused a lot on the gender pay gap over the past couple of years and continue to do so. Actually, just last week was Equal Pay Day. And that's the day how long it would take in addition for women to make as much as men do. And we focus a lot on those issues. We also really try to create community. As you mentioned, it's a fast growing section, and we have about 1,500 members now. And when we were a committee, I think we were capped at 40. So that's pretty good in 6 or 7 years to make that leap. We do a variety of other programming. We're going to talk about the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Amendment, which will be July 2nd of this year. We have a program coming up in June. And then every year we do our Women on the Move program. We don't have our topic yet for this year, but it's usually focused on ways to assist women in advancing in the legal profession in one way or the other. It's a really talented and amazing group of women, and I've been really honored to serve as the chair this year.
Well, it's a great group, and you've got great leadership, including yourself. And I'm very happy and proud to take whatever credit I can for
I think you should.
all the good work that you're doing. And I'm going to encourage everyone to look at the Wills Connect,
Thank you. Yes.
which is going to come out. And your piece, I think it'll be in Wills Connect, but it's also going to come out separately. So anybody that wants to do a deeper dive into the equal rights amendment in New York certainly will have that opportunity.
Absolutely. Our last issue, what's already up of Wills Connect, focuses on women's health in all ways, including business health, mental health, financial health. So I'm really proud of the issues of Wills Connect that we put out. We put out 2 a year. And so thanks for promoting that, because I really think it's a great publication.
Well, Kim Wolf Price, great having you on Miranda Warnings.
Thank you.
And good luck to you with your rest of your term as the chair of the Wonderful Women in Law section, and also good luck with your podcast, Legally Bond, at Bond, Shinnick and King. It's great having you.
Thanks so much. It's always good to talk to you, Dave. I appreciate it.
This has been Miranda Warnings, a New York State Bar Association podcast. You have the right to subscribe, rate, and review.